In October 1962, the United States faced a moment that would define not only its leadership, but the survival of the modern world. Just 90 miles from American shores, hidden beneath palm trees and camouflage nets, nuclear missiles capable of killing tens of millions of people were being assembled in silence. For the first time in history, the American homeland stood under immediate nuclear threat, not from across an ocean, but from its own neighborhood. What followed was not merely a confrontation between two superpowers. It was a test of resolve, intelligence, restraint, and moral courage. And in that moment, the United States demonstrated a form of leadership that would prevent catastrophe and reshape the course of history. The roots of this crisis stretch back to the terrifying dawn of the nuclear age in August 1945, when atomic bombs devastated Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The world emerged from World War II victorious but permanently altered. Nuclear weapons introduced a paradox that would dominate global politics: unimaginable destructive power that paradoxically prevented large-scale war. As arsenals expanded, hydrogen bombs multiplied the destructive potential, and intercontinental ballistic missiles transformed geography into irrelevance. The emerging nuclear balance was built not on trust, but on fear, a fragile equilibrium known as deterrence. Efforts to control these weapons began almost immediately. American policymakers proposed international supervision and gradual disarmament, yet mistrust between Washington and Moscow proved insurmountable. The Cold War hardened into a global ideological competition in which both sides operated under the assumption that the other was rational, yet potentially dangerous. Most confrontations remained geographically distant from the United States, centered in Europe and Asia. That changed dramatically in 1959. When Fidel Castro seized power in Cuba, American leaders initially watched cautiously. However, mass executions, political repression, and the rapid alignment of Cuba with the Soviet Union transformed the island into a strategic concern. The presence of a Soviet-aligned government in the Western Hemisphere represented not only an ideological challenge, but a potential military foothold. The failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961 intensified this perception, damaging American prestige while convincing Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev that the young American president might be hesitant to escalate confrontation. This miscalculation would prove dangerously consequential. Behind the scenes, the Soviet Union launched one of the most audacious strategic gambles of the Cold War. Under a plan known as Operation Anadir, Moscow secretly deployed nuclear-capable missile forces to Cuba. The operation was designed to achieve several objectives simultaneously: protect the Cuban regime from invasion, rapidly improve Soviet nuclear parity, and alter global perceptions of strategic balance. What American intelligence did not initially realize was even more alarming. Nuclear-capable tactical weapons were already present on the island, and certain commanders had conditional authority to use them if communication with Moscow was lost during combat. Throughout the summer of 1962, reports emerged suggesting unusual military activity in Cuba. Yet many analysts believed the Soviet Union would not risk deploying offensive nuclear weapons so close to American territory. This assumption nearly proved fatal. Only the persistence of a few intelligence officials led to renewed aerial reconnaissance. On October 14, 1962, an American U-2 reconnaissance flight captured photographic evidence that would change everything. Analysts identified missile launchers, erectors, transport vehicles, and carefully arranged defensive systems consistent with Soviet medium and intermediate-range ballistic missile deployments. Construction was advancing at remarkable speed. Within hours, the photographs reached the White House. President John F. Kennedy and his advisors reacted with shock, not because the possibility had never been discussed, but because Soviet leaders had repeatedly denied any intention of deploying such weapons. The discovery represented not merely a military threat, but a breach of trust that carried enormous diplomatic implications. Kennedy immediately convened a small group of advisors that became known as the Executive Committee of the National Security Council. The discussions that followed were among the most consequential in human history. Military leaders initially favored decisive action. Airstrikes, followed by invasion, promised rapid elimination of the missile threat. Yet Kennedy's experience during the Bay of Pigs made him deeply skeptical of optimistic military projections. Detailed questioning revealed that a so-called surgical strike would explore alternatives that would preserve American credibility while reducing the risk of nuclear war. This cautious yet firm approach reflected a crucial strength, the ability to balance power with restraint. The solution ultimately adopted was a naval quarantine of Cuba. The term itself was carefully chosen to avoid the legal implications of declaring a blockade, which would constitute an act of war under international law. On October 22nd, Kennedy addressed the American people in a televised speech that instantly captured global attention. Calm but resolute, he presented photographic evidence of the missile sites, announced the quarantine, and declared that any nuclear launch from Cuba would be regarded as an attack by the Soviet Union itself. The speech demonstrated clarity, confidence, and moral authority, qualities that strengthened American diplomatic standing and unified public opinion. In the days that followed, the world entered a period of extraordinary tension. American naval forces moved into position as Soviet ships approached the quarantine line. Nuclear forces on both sides entered heightened alert. Each decision carried the potential to trigger irreversible escalation. Yet even amid this confrontation, American leadership emphasized communication, alliance coordination, and careful signaling designed to avoid accidental war. One of the most dangerous moments unfolded not in Washington or Moscow, but deep beneath the Atlantic Ocean. A Soviet submarine operating near Cuba, cut off from reliable communication and subjected to American depth charge signaling intended to force surfacing, experienced extreme heat, rising carbon dioxide levels, and mounting psychological stress. Believing war might already have begun, the submarine commander ordered preparation of a nuclear torpedo. Launch authorization required the agreement of multiple officers. In that suffocating environment, the decision could have initiated nuclear war. It was prevented only when Soviet officer Vasily Arkhipov intervened, persuading the commander to stand down. Unknown to the world at the time, humanity had come terrifyingly close to catastrophe. Meanwhile, negotiations between Washington and Moscow intensified. Messages from Khrushchev revealed both anxiety and willingness to compromise. A critical breakthrough occurred when American officials privately signaled readiness to remove obsolete U.S. missiles from Turkey in exchange for Soviet withdrawal from Cuba, provided the arrangement remained confidential. Publicly, the United States maintained its firm stance, preserving credibility and strategic advantage. Privately, diplomacy created a pathway out of the crisis. On October 28th, the Soviet Union announced it would dismantle and remove the missiles from Cuba. The immediate nuclear threat was eliminated. The United States pledged not to invade Cuba, and the secret understanding regarding Turkey was implemented shortly afterward. The confrontation ended not with military victory, but with strategic success. The removal of offensive nuclear weapons from the Western Hemisphere without war. The crisis revealed how close misperception, technological limitations, and human fear could bring the world to disaster. Yet it also demonstrated the power of measured leadership, disciplined intelligence gathering, and the willingness to resist emotional pressure in moments of extreme danger. Kennedy's management of the crisis reflected lessons learned from earlier failures. Rigorous questioning of assumptions, encouragement of open debate among advisors, and a deliberate effort to create time for diplomacy to function. Equally important was the recognition that adversaries possess their own fears, constraints, and motivations. In retrospect, newly declassified information has shown that the dangers were even greater than leaders realized at the time. Tactical nuclear weapons already in Cuba, communication breakdowns, and near-launch incidents underscore how fragile nuclear stability can be. The crisis ultimately reinforced the necessity of direct communication channels, arms control efforts, and a deeper understanding of the human dimension behind strategic decisions. The Cuban Missile Crisis stands as one of the defining moments of American leadership in the 20th century. Faced with an unprecedented threat, the United States combined strength with restraint, military readiness with diplomatic initiative, and determination with caution. The outcome was not merely the avoidance of war, but the preservation of a world that would continue beyond October 1962. It is a reminder that power alone does not prevent catastrophe. Leadership does. And in that pivotal moment, the choices made in Washington helped steer humanity away from the edge of nuclear destruction